We're gonna have some episodes in the can here because now that I'm not working a full time job at the moment, ideas for episodes come to me a lot faster than they did before. So I'm gonna build up a library here, and they're just gonna be posted as I can. So on that note, what if I told you that the most fatal natural disaster in United States history happened with absolutely no warning? Well, at least as far as the public was concerned, there was absolutely no warning. Let me explain. So here's how this happened. On September 8th, 1900, the fine people of Galveston, Texas woke up like any other beautiful morning with the sun coming out and the temperatures as usual around 80-ish degrees at sunrise. Just another, late summer day in what was then Texas' largest city. Galveston was Texas' largest city in 1900. Population at the time was 37,000. Texas, of course, did not have a very large number of population at the time. It's not like it is today. And an entire state with maybe a couple 100,000 people at the time. I'll have to check my records on that just to be sure, but that's kind of where the state was at. Largely agricultural at the time. And in 1900, in September of 1900, the oil boom had not really started in Texas yet. The discovery had just happened a few weeks ago up the road in Beaumont at a oil platform called Spindletop. So it was actually about a week prior to September 8th. So it was like September 1 of 1900. Though the discovery of oil, of course, would set an entirely different course for the state forever. However, at the time of September 8th, that course had not been charted yet. The discovery had just been made, and Galveston at this time was a port city. One was basically the largest port in the United States at the time. A critical transportation hub. It goes without saying that this place was huge in terms of economic importance to the state of Texas at the time. So September 8th, 1900 started like any other day. That said, though, and the morning progressed like any other morning. That said, though, at the noon hour, roughly, storm clouds started coming in off of the Gulf of Mexico. At this point, people thought that those were just typical thunderstorms. However, a couple hours in, it was very clear at that point, once we get to around mid-afternoon, these were not your typical run-of-the-mill off-the-coast thunderstorms. And I think by this time everybody kind of knew this was a hurricane. And this hurricane came upon the people of Galveston with no notice. Now, when I say it's the people, there were some people who were notified in advance. That was the people of the National Weather Service in Galveston. They were alerted about an incoming storm by our friends in Cuba. The Cuban hurricane authorities were actually the premier hurricane authorities of the era. They were much better at this than we were. Obviously, you flip it around, come to the present day, and it's obviously completely reversed. You wouldn't trust them as far as you could throw them these days with hurricane projections. But these days, the National Weather Service is the most advanced weather forecasting system in the world. However, in 1900, it was in reverse. So the people of Galveston, the regular citizens, the only people that had any clue that this could happen were the folks of the National Weather Service in Galveston. But they didn't tell the regular population because they believed it to be a false alarm. There was nothing in their maps or tracking that indicated that a hurricane could strike anytime soon. The reason why the Cubans were able to do this is because that hurricane did come through there. And so they were able to give the heads up, or at least try to, give the heads up to the American neighbors. However, by early evening, by the time you're getting closer to dinner hour, Category 4 winds were lacing the island. A storm surge of over 20 feet was pounding the island. Now, to understand Galveston Island at this particular time, Galveston is on a barrier island about 2 miles into the Gulf. Galveston is a barrier island. At the time, the highest elevation on the island was 8 feet. So that'll tell you what a 20-foot storm surge could do. Completely overwhelm the island. And a storm surge isn't just water running over. It's water running over at force. And so an extra 12 feet of water above the top level of the island was enough to knock buildings down by itself before the wind is even calculated into the equation. The wind was estimated to be of Category 4 strength when the studies were done years later. So this means that the winds were maximum sustained winds were somewhere around 140 miles an hour. Now we were talking about real damage coming in. The storm surge could knock buildings down on its own. The storm surge on its own knocked down the railway bridge between the island and the mainland. But then you put 140 mile an hour winds, maximum sustained winds on top of that, and you know where this is headed. A historic storm, a catastrophic storm. Population of 37,000 on Galveston Island. Fatality count estimated, low end 8,000, high end 12,000. About 1/3 of the island's population was extinguished in one afternoon. The most fatal natural disaster in the history of the United States still is. The other thing to remember is Hurricane Katrina in 2005 was also a majorly catastrophic storm of similar strength. However, by that point, the National Weather Service had advanced to the point where we are close to where we are now, where advanced warnings several days out could be given. And for Katrina, they were. They were given, about 2 or 3 days ahead of time. Now, how the evacuation was handled is a completely different story, and how the city of New Orleans and the state of Louisiana handled this information is a completely different farce altogether. Excuse me. But Katrina killed about 2,000 people. The New Orleans metropolitan area at the time had a population of about 1.6 million. I mean, it was less than 1% of the island of New Orleans population that was killed by this storm. In Galveston in 1900, it was 1/3. So the reason why it was so fatal to Galveston, of course, was no advance warning. And the reason why it was relatively lower in the case of Katrina is because they had warning. Now, the evacuation, of course, was slipshod, which is why the fatalities were even as high as they were. But very similar strength storms. And of course, Galveston blew off the warning because they didn't believe, given the tranquil conditions of the morning of September 8th, that anything could happen that day other than a normal sunny or late summer day on Galveston Island. Little do they know, 1/3 of the population would be dead by nightfall. They had no warning. For some referential points on this one, the Great Galveston Hurricane of 1900 changed the entire history of the state of Texas. The boom days of the Wall Street of Galveston were over. Galveston fought to rebuild. They eventually did, but the glory days never returned. What happened was that a lot of the investment and the big money moved inland to Houston. So it moved 60 miles inland, which is why Houston today is the state's largest city. It would not be the state's largest city if not for the 1900 storm. It changed the entire economic trajectory of southeastern Texas. The 1900 hurricane also had direct impact on my hometown. Katy is 60 miles inland from the Gulf. The 1900 hurricane to this date is the only storm to ever reach Katy at hurricane strength. It was a Category 1 storm by the time it reached what was then called Cane Island, present-day original town of Katy. Present-day city proper of about 30,000 people, close to the size of Galveston in 1900. Still a very economically Katy is a very economically powerful region, but it did not have the outsized it doesn't have the outsized influence that Galveston did in 1900. Don't get me wrong, Katy is economically very vibrant. The greater Katy region is very economically vibrant, but it does not have the outsized power of Galveston in 1900. This is the only hurricane to ever reach Katy at hurricane strength. The National Register of Historic Places reflects this. Only 3 houses in the original Cane Island settlement, present-day original city limits of Katy, survived the storm. The Thomas House, the Eiley House, and the Black House. These 3 houses stand today in Old Town Katy on the National Register of Historic Places. So I told you how powerful the storm was. Harvey dumped 36 inches of rain on Katy, but it reached the city as a tropical storm. That storm did its damage through excessive rainfall, not through wind at all. A tropical storm is typically maximum sustained winds of anywhere between 39 and 74 miles per hour. So that is what came through Katy as part of Harvey. But a hurricane strength is anything with maximum sustained winds of over 74 miles an hour. Hurricanes typically break down and disintegrate as they move inland. Katy is 60 miles inland from the Gulf, and it's still reached there as a category, at least a Category 1 hurricane, if not possibly greater. Wind was not recorded in this storm because it also struck them with no notice as well. If it struck the coast of Galveston with no warning, it also struck the inland settlements with no advance warning, including Houston itself. So there you go, guys. The most fatal natural disaster in the history of the United States struck with absolutely no warning whatsoever. That hurricane of 1900. That is it. We'll see you next time. We'll see you on the next episode, and peace out, homies.